LiberalViewer presents. LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the October 8th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out 9 of the weekend's best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. I also have 2 political comedy sources today. There'll be a clip from Saturday Night Live and a clip from Real Time with Bill Maher from HBO. But as usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big 5 corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You can see a description of my one topic is, still no gun control. That's the topic. There were a few other topics covered on the Sunday morning news analysis shows that I didn't cover. The whole Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, calling President Trump a moron. The possible storm coming with North Korea or Iran or whatever Donald Trump was talking about. And several other things happened this week. But I thought it would focus, on this one issue. And mainly on the possibility that Congress may, for once, pass some sort of gun control, specifically a ban or regulation of bump stocks. When bump stocks are these additions you put on semi-automatic rifles. You take off the butt, the end, the stock, and you replace it with this bump stock that makes your finger keep hitting the trigger because of the recoil of the rifle. And that's one of the things that was used in this recent shooting, which I'm not really covering very much, but that was also covered on the Sunday morning news analysis shows. But like I said, I want to start with a couple political comedy clips satirizing Congress's inability to pass gun control. And in fact, I've actually asked a poll question up here. There's a little eye in the corner if you want to answer the poll question as to whether you think Congress will pass any form of gun control this year. And I'll give my opinion on that. I've also put a list of the 9 clips and 1 still image I'll be using. The still image is actually the... Wait, no.
That is a bump stock.
Sorry, that was a mistake. I have to get you the still image isn't in there yet, but I will. I'm gonna have to fix. That was already a mistake here. I messed up the audio source on that. The actual audio source on that should be, well, I don't know. Maybe I can fix that while I'm showing you this first political comedy. And that was supposed to be the bonus Sandy clip. See, now the show's gone all out of control. Sandy took over the show momentarily, but that wasn't the comedy clip I was hoping to show you. This is the political comedy clip on satirizing Congress's inability to get anything done. It's from Michael Che on Weekend Update, Saturday Night Live last night, in a clip you can actually see in full on YouTube on the Saturday Night Live YouTube channel at a link I put down in the video description. Here it is, the part that I took for you, or actually that I edited together for you here.
Why is it so hard to get gun control in this country? I mean, who are these delicate snowflakes that we can't just tell, no, you're not allowed to have 40 guns anymore, Earl. From now on, you can have 1 gun, max, and 6 bullets. If you can't hit what you're shooting with 6 bullets, then you don't need to be shooting at it. Learn karate or use your words. I'm sick of this narrative that Americans just love guns so much. It's not true. 78% of Americans don't even own a gun. And 3% of Americans own 50% of all the guns in the country. That's the problem, that whiny 3% that needs to feel secure all the time. Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, said that he wants Congress to look into some proposals for gun control, but first he wants to look into this briefcase from the NRA. We got to do something about the guns in this country. And I know about the Second Amendment. I know you think you need your guns to protect you from the government. I notice the people that bring up the Second Amendment all the time are always the same people that preach, respect law enforcement, support the troops. Meanwhile, they have a closet full of weapons because they think those same troops are going to come and drive their house away. It's hypocritical. It's like saying, I love my wife, I trust my wife, but I swear to God, that sneaky bitch is coming for me.
So that is satirizing I guess what some people would call the gun nuts, or the people who are strict on the Second Amendment. By the way, that was what I was trying to show you before. This was my still image. And now you can hear this is the text of the Second Amendment: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And what is ambiguous about the Second Amendment is that the first 13 words, how do they change the meaning of the last 14 words? It's like 27 words with a sort of a split personality. The first 13 words mean something kind of different than the second 14. And that's kind of one of the controversies. Is it an individual right, like the second 14 words say, or is it something having to do with protecting state militias, which is, for example, the ACLU, the national ACLU position is that it's more of a collective state militia right because of those first 13 words. But the Supreme Court split 5-4 in the Reynolds, I think it was the Reynolds decision, a fairly recent Supreme Court decision where they decided it was actually an individual right, which is one of the reasons we have these problems. But before I get to the actual substance and some more discussion of the Second Amendment, I want to have one more political comedy clip for you here. This is Bill Maher and his monologue. This is just about 20 seconds long. I thought it was the best joke, where he talked also about, the Trump base that really cares about gun rights. And then I'll actually show some polling from NBC Meet the Press, Chuck Todd talking in his data download, some actual polling that backs this up. But here's the humorous take on it from Bill Maher. I thought this was good anyway, last Friday on HBO's Real Time here.
Don't forget that. No, Roger Stone, Trump's albino assassin. Oh, Roger. He said if Trump even thinks about doing something about gun control, the, quote, base will go insane. How will we know? What is...
I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I like kind of the punchline to that 20-second joke. Sometimes I criticize Bill Maher, but I thought that was the part of the show that on this issue that I thought worth watching. In fact, there was a previous joke about hope thoughts and prayers that I thought was not really worth taking. I almost brought it, but as usual, you can watch the entire monologue on the Real-Time channel on YouTube at a link I put down in the video description. But that's the last political comedy clip I want to show you on the topic of congressional inability to pass gun control. But as both those political comedy clips kind of introduced, this data download from Meet the Press, I kind of teased this a little earlier. This shows especially the very last part about the enthusiasm, people who really vote on this issue. I mean, first you'll see some of the divide in Americans politically and according to their location as to whether they own guns or not. But the last statistic I think is the most important for this whole gun control battle, as I will discuss after we watch this 2-minute clip together over here.
Data download time. Las Vegas has put gun control back in the center of debate in the country, but few seem to think there will actually be substantial movement on the issue. The reason may be best understood by looking at who owns guns and who is most invested in this debate. According to recent data from the Pew Research Center, 42% of all households in America have a gun in the home. That's not even half the country. And when we look at gun ownership by race, you see it this way. 49% of white households have a gun in the home, 32% of African-American households, and 21% of Hispanic households. There's a big rural-urban split. 58% of rural households own guns, compared to 41% of suburban homes, and only 29% of those who live in urban America. And not surprisingly, the partisan political divide is also evident on the question of gun ownership. More than half of all Republican households, 56%, own a gun. That number is only 30% for Democratic homes. So we know who owns guns, but who actually cares the most about this issue? In a recent NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, we asked, other than foreign policy, national defense, and the economy, which one or two issues impact how you vote in an election? Well, guess what? Gun rights and gun control were #1 overall at 35%. But look at the partisan breakdown on this answer. 47%, nearly half of Trump voters said the gun issue impacts. Data download time. Las Vegas has put gun control back in the center of debate in the country, but few seem to think there will actually be substantial movement on the issue. The reason may be best understood by looking at who owns guns and who is most invested in this debate. According to recent data from the Pew Research Center, 42% of all households in America have a gun in the home. That's not even half the country. And when we look at gun ownership by race, you see it this way. 49% of white households have a gun in the home, 32% of African-American households, and 21% of Hispanic households. There's a big rural-urban split. 58% of rural households own guns, compared to 41% of suburban homes, and only 29% of those who live in urban America. And not surprisingly, the partisan political divide is also evident on the question of gun ownership. More than half of all Republican households, 56%, own a gun. That number is only 30% for Democratic homes. So we know who owns guns, but who actually cares the most about this issue. In a recent NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, we asked, other than foreign policy, national defense, and the economy, which one or two issues impact how you vote in an election? Well, guess what? Gun rights and gun control were #1 overall at 35%. But look at the partisan breakdown on this answer. 47%, nearly half of Trump voters said the gun issue impacts how they vote in an election. It's a whopping 20 points higher than Clinton voters. Only 27% of them said the same thing. In other words, people who support gun rights vote on that issue. Opponents, they don't vote as often or with as much passion. Look, there's a long list of reasons why gun control advocates will have a hard time tightening gun laws, including politicians' fears of being opposed by the gun lobby. When you look at the numbers, though, one side is clearly more invested in this debate than the other. And in politics, enthusiasm does matter. And on this issue, gun rights advocates have a crucial edge. When we come back...
I apologize for doubling up that clip and the random clip of my dog Sandy in the middle there. I was trying to make sure, as I said earlier, I was trying to fix the audio on one clip, and I said I would do it like during some of the other clips, and what happened, my software somehow randomly went to the clip of the dog I have saved for the bonus Sandy clip later, and anyway, and I can't start a clip in the middle. I can only start them at the beginning, so I apologize for that. But my commentary on that clip is, like I said, the last part is most important because it shows that as long as the pro-gun voters are most enthusiastic in terms of voting on that issue, and people who care about gun control aren't as enthusiastic. I mean, I'm not that enthusiastic about gun control. It's not that important an issue for me. I even have some skepticism about at least whether certain types of gun control work, but I certainly am not a big absolutist. I mean, I'm skeptical both about people who are, Second Amendment, gun rights and gun control, but I'm not like a big fan or a big proponent of either one very strongly. I guess I'm not an enthusiastic voter, and people who really care about gun rights are enthusiastic voters on that issue. And before I get to the Republicans who are enthusiastic on the gun issue, I wanted to show a couple Democrats trying to stake out the ground of how this time they're going to get something passed, and especially on this whole idea of bump stocks. And several of these news clips explain and show pictures of the bump stocks that I already explained at the beginning. And the two Democrats I'm going to show, the two senators, are Senator Dianne Feinstein, who actually was sort of a victim of gun violence in that she became mayor of San Francisco after a couple other people on the Board of Supervisors were assassinated, including the mayor, and Harvey Milk, who was on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. And that's part of Chuck Todd's introduction to the clip I will discuss with you after we watch it over here.
Democrats, of course, have taken a very different position on guns. In 1978, Senator Dianne Feinstein of California became mayor of San Francisco when the mayor, George Moscone, and city supervisor Harvey Milk were shot to death by a colleague. This week, Feinstein introduced a bill to ban bump stocks. Well, I spoke with her yesterday and pointed out that this is the least ambitious of the more than a dozen gun bills she has introduced over the years. And I asked her what that says about the state of the country's gun debate.
Well, the state is sad. America is a gun-happy country. And I think there are many of us in growing numbers that don't want a gun-happy country. Guns have their place. I don't have a problem if they're used properly. But what I have seen over the decades is a growth of substantial improper use of weapons, beginning with the Texas bell tower You've seen law offices, you've seen businesses, you've seen movie theaters, you've seen high schools, you've seen colleges, you've seen a primary school with first graders in it, 20 of them killed. And now you see a great American classic, which is country music, people by the thousands out in a safe place with a big hotel in the background, and somebody comes along. He has been legal, he's gotten his weapons legally, he has 40 weapons, he has 12 of these bump stocks, they are on the weapons, and he begins to fire a weapon that fires similar to a machine gun out of 2 broken hotel windows. Every American should look at those pictures and say, do we want more of this? This is one simple thing that stops the making of a semi-automatic weapon into a machine gun.
Let me ask you this.
Of course, when I get to the Republicans and the people from the NRA, like Wayne LaPierre and Chris Cox later, they'll say it's not quite so simple. It's even just banning or these gun stocks, and they'll be for the ATF regulating, but not the Congress banning bump stocks, which is one reason I think if you answer this poll question I have up here about whether Congress will pass any gun control legislation, I'm definitely leaning towards no. I mean, especially you heard that Senator Dianne Feinstein, senator from my state, who's one of the big long-term proponents of gun control, that she has a very unambitious agenda, as Chuck Todd pointed out in his questioning there. And even, I mean, she mentioned the shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, where 20 kids were killed. And if that didn't end up with Congress passing any sort of gun control, I mean, how much worse can it get than that? I mean, they said that this last week in Las Vegas was the worst shooting in American history, but a lot of people are saying that. But worst is actually a value judgment, and I mean, Newtown, it was pretty. I mean, 20 like preschool kids or like elementary school kids. That's, as you could make an argument that could be the worst shooting as well. And Senator Chris Murphy is the senator from Connecticut, which is why he has like a lot of moral outrage on this. And you'll see in this Jake Tapper introduction where Jake Tapper actually does do some more explanation. I think they even show a picture of the bump stocks here in this clip. I know they do in a couple of the clips, and I think this is one of them. And you'll see Chris Murphy follows up on his statement that Congress has to get off its ass, or I don't know, does Congress have an ass? Is maybe Senator Ted Cruz, is he Congress's ass? But no, sorry, that's a bad joke. But here is Senator Chris Murphy talking to Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union from his place of moral righteousness, being the senator from Connecticut where this Newtown shooting was that killed the 20 kids, and his perspective over here.
Over gun control, this time with some small signs of agreement. Republicans have expressed openness to a measure that would ban or restrict ownership of bump stocks. Those are the mechanisms used by the Las Vegas shooter to turn his semi-automatic rifles into something more closely resembling an even more rapid-fire automatic weapon. Even the NRA this week endorsed tighter restrictions on the device, though the gun group wants to avoid doing this through any new legislation. One senator at the center of this debate is Democrat Chris Murphy of Connecticut. He represented Newtown in Congress at the time of the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012, and he is now calling on Congress to, quote, get off its ass and do something about gun violence in America. Senator Murphy is joining us now live from Connecticut. Senator, thanks for joining us. A growing number of Republican lawmakers say that they're open to regulating or banning bump stocks, the kind of device used by the Las Vegas killer that, as you know, allows a legal semi-automatic rifle to mimic the rapid discharge of a fully automatic weapon. Are you willing to advance a clean bump stocks bill, or will you insist on a broader gun control package?
I am willing to move forward with the Republicans on banning these bump stocks that, as you mentioned, subverts legislation that's been long on the books, banning automatic weapons. I think you have to walk before you run, and I do think this is an important moment. The NRA, at least in the time that I've been in Congress, has never been willing to change U.S. gun laws. I think they see that they were likely going to lose this fight in Congress, and so now they're trying to get it done through administrative action. But this is the first time that the gun lobby has shown willingness to come to the table, and I think that's in part because Americans just simply do not accept mass shooting after mass shooting happening and Congress doing absolutely nothing. But this is a fairly small change, and if we really want to have a downward trajectory on the number of mass shootings or the number of gun deaths every single day, you've got to go far beyond just clarifying that people shouldn't have automatic weapons in this country.
The ATF, it's been reported, approved the bump stock during the Obama administration. Was that a mistake?
Well, the underlying language is ambiguous, and that's what the ATF's conclusion was in 2010. Now, I wish the ATF had banned this technology then, but their point is that with a statute that is unclear, it's up to Congress to change it. Ultimately, I think that we have to have a bill before the House and the Senate that makes it completely clear that if you own an automatic weapon, if you've converted a semi-automatic weapon to an automatic weapon, then that is illegal, and ultimately I think it's best done by Congress rather than through administrative action.
More broadly, there was a...
So that is sort of the optimistic projection from Senator Chris Murphy along with from Senator Dianne Feinstein, the two Democrats I'm showing here, but I'm not at all optimistic that even this bump stock regulation or at least a congressional action clarifying the previous, I actually read through the statutes and it's kind of obscure, but basically the idea is that a machine gun is a firearm that is heavily regulated and especially can't be produced, but the bump stock isn't a firearm, it's a firearm part, and so it's not regulated under the act, and so, or it's actually ambiguous. I don't know. I tried to wade through it earlier today, and I didn't get far enough that I could give you a really good legal analysis on it, but I think you're going to hear kind of from Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA, the National Rifle Association. He's going to give his interpretation that this whole bump stock thing is a way to get rid of semi-automatic weapons, the ones that you have to pull the trigger every time you want it to fire. Like the AR-15 before you put the bump stock on it. And in a way he kind of has a point, because if you, like the bump stock is the end of the rifle that you stick on there that makes it fire faster. It doesn't fire quite as fast as an automatic weapon. And also, if you think about it, the real dangerous half isn't the bump stock half, it's the semi-automatic weapon half, which is, you'll see Wayne LaPierre is really worried that bump stocks are making the line too fuzzy, and it's going to lead to these semi-automatic rifle, these assault weapons, as Dianne Feinstein actually had legislation outlawing them that expired years ago, and I will discuss that with you after you see Wayne LaPierre attack Dianne Feinstein and the fuzzy lines that bump stocks are going to create if we outlaw them by legislation over in... Oh, and this is talking to John Dickerson over on CBS's Face the Nation, and I sort of edited together two clips on the whole fuzzy line concept over here.
Senator Feinstein wants legislation to ban bump fire stocks. What's the NRA position on that?
Can I say first, this has been a tragic week. I mean, we had NRA members out there in the middle of that tragedy. We had NRA families. We had families wounded out there. It's just been horrible. But to the people that are trying to politicize this tragedy, I would say this: there are monsters like this monster out there every day. There are menaces out there every day. People want to be able to protect themselves. That's why they support this freedom. All the elites that have been speaking out this past week, they all want to protect themselves. They all protect themselves with armed security. I mean, they criticize the NRA. You want to talk about irresponsible use of firearms? The number one person teaching irresponsible use of firearms is all these elites' employer. the Hollywood television gaming industry. We spend millions teaching responsible use of firearms. They make billions every single day, John, teaching irresponsible use of firearms. They're so hypocritical, it's unbelievable.
But is it really an elite position for a person to think if there is evil in the world, perhaps there should be something that makes it a little harder for the evil person to get their hand on something that can fire bullets with such rapidity, and then bump fire stocks, which make it a bit available to fire them even faster? That's not elite. That's just somebody trying to figure out how to have less people be dead.
Well, I do think this. I mean, if we could legislate morality, we would have done it long ago. I mean, as we talked before, Paris wouldn't have happened. They outlawed fully automatic guns. Brussels, San Bernardino, California has every gun law under the sun. It still happens. I mean, the bad people could care. But on bump stocks, let me say this. The fact is that the Obama administration a couple years ago legalized a device, their ATF, that fuzzed the line between semi-automatics and fully automatics. And if we're able to fuzz that line, all semi-automatics are at risk. I've been arguing for Dianne Feinstein for years, has been trying to ban semi-autos, saying a semi-auto is a semi-auto, semi-auto. It's not an assault weapon, like you say, Dianne Feinstein, and it's not a machine gun. But if you fuzz the line, they're all at risk, and we're not going to let that happen.
Well, let's not fuzz the line. She says this specific piece of legislation just bans bump fire stocks. So does the NRA support that or no?
It's illegal to convert a semi-automatic to a fully automatic. ATF needs to do its job. They need to look at this and do its job.
Her argument is, and the ATF says, they can't rule on this. It's out of their purview, that it has to be done in legislation. So is the NRA position it can't be done through legislation, or you oppose it? Where are you on this?
No, we think ATF ought to do its job, look at this, and draw a bright line.
If I'm a Republican and I'm a fan of the NRA, do I want to say no or yes to legislation that does this?
I think you want to tell ATF to do its job. It's an interpretive issue, and they need to get the job done. But not let Dianne Feinstein, which is what she wants to do, turn this all into some Christmas tree on the Hill where she brings all her anti-gun circus she's been trying to do for years into this.
Is the NRA position that you're okay with the current restrictions against fully automatic?
We have supported the existing law on fully automatic firearms. And what we don't want is we don't want the line to be fuzzed, because if you fuzz the line, you're putting every semi-automatic firearm for years. And I've corrected Dianne Feinstein over and over and over when she says assault weapons, they're fully automatic guns. I said they're not. But if somebody fuzzes a line, you're putting every semi-automatic firearm at risk.
But to be fair to Senator Feinstein, she didn't fuzz the line in the conversation we just had. She was actually, perhaps because over the years you have come out on the winning end of these arguments, said that this only deals with this one specific bump fire stock. So in this case, the line is not being fuzzed.
Well, I mean, the fact is the bump stock does fuzz the line, though, and that's why ATF needs to do its job.
If you fuzz the line, you put every semi-automatic weapon at risk, according to Wayne LaPierre from the National Rifle Association. And that is what is really the danger here, that we put semi-automatic rifles at risk, because, you know, this is a very dangerous world for semi-automatic rifles. Did you hear what they did in Australia? They confiscated over 600,000 guns, and now they don't have mass shootings anymore. But it's very dangerous there if you're a semi-automatic rifle. And we want America to be safe for semi-automatic rifles, at least according to Wayne LaPierre, because fuzzing the line, that's the beginning of the slippery slope if you fuzz the line. Am I right? Am I right, people? You let me know. But I find Wayne LaPierre very difficult to stand or watch in large amounts, and I think actually the NRA has a significantly better spokesperson in Chris Cox, who was over on Fox News Sunday, where he was asked, you know, a semi-confrontational question from Chris Wallace, the host of Fox News Sunday, and I think this is half as long as the Wayne LaPierre clip, but I think it's also a much smoother rendition, and the whole, like, we want a regulation, not a ban thing is more well hidden than the whole, don't fuzz the line, don't fuzz the line, it threatens our weapons if they fuzz the line. You won't hear that from Chris Cox. Here's Chris Cox on Fox News Sunday talking to Chris Wallace this morning here.
For gun control. Most of us also learned about a device, bump stocks, that allow rifles to fire faster. And now even some of the strongest advocates of gun rights are calling for more regulation. Joining me here is Chris Cox, Executive Director of the National Rifle Association. Mr. Cox, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Chris.
The NRA surprised a lot of people this week, calling for ATF to review bump stocks. Here's part of your statement. Let's put it on the screen. The NRA believes that devices designed to allow semi-automatic rifles to function like fully automatic rifles should be subject to additional regulations. This regulation had been on the books for 7 years. Why is the NRA suddenly concerned, and what specifically would you like to see ATF do?
Well, what we've called for is for ATF to review any device that changes semi-automatics to function like fully automatics. As you probably know, it's illegal to convert a semi-automatic to fully automatic. ATF did approve these under Barack Obama. And what the National Rifle Association has said is ATF needs to do their job, review these, and if there's a further regulation, then we'll work on further regulation. But Chris, what we saw last week was pure evil, and we've seen that evil has existed in this country. We've seen box cutters and airplanes, cars, bombs, trucks full of explosives, and yes, firearms. So as we have this conversation, we need to look at the broader picture. We need to have an honest discussion about what works and what doesn't work. And our concern is that all this focus on devices takes away the attention from the underlying behavior. And until we address that, these things are going to continue to happen.
Well, let's just talk about the underlying behavior. You're the NRA, so we're going to talk to you about the specific technique. Would you be okay with banning bump stocks?
Well, we don't believe that bans have ever worked on anything. What we've said has been very clear, that if something transfers a semi-automatic to function like fully automatic, then it ought to be regulated differently. Fully automatics are regulated differently in this country. If something copies a semi-automatic into a fully automatic, then those should be regulated as well.
Did you get any blowback from...
So I thought that was a little smoother, but there was still a lot of dodges in there. The whole, they commit crimes with box cutters line, and you heard Wayne LaPierre try to, in the previous clip, talk about Hollywood and the gaming industry glorifying violence instead of talking about responsible gun ownership like the NRA. But one of the clips that makes me most pessimistic about the possibility of gun control is the interview I saw with Steve Scalise over on NBC's Meet the Press. He's the Republican House Majority Whip who was at this Republican baseball team practice and was a shooting victim, took several weeks at least in the hospital to recover. His pelvis was shattered, and he had internal injuries that sounded kind of nasty, and yet having gone through all of that, he still is not only against gun control and a gun rights advocate, but he starts off here using one of the bogus arguments that I always hear. If you are a gun shooting victim and you're still using the bogus arguments, that shows that it's very difficult to change people's minds, I guess, because the bogus argument is that, well, Chicago and Washington, D.C. have really strict gun control laws, yet they have all these shootings. Well, that's because they don't control their borders. We're one nation, and as you'll see Chuck Todd point out, in Chicago, you just go over to Gary, Indiana, where they have very loose gun control laws, and there's nobody stopping you at the border after you buy the gun. And you'll see several other arguments from Steve Scalise here in this. It's about a little under 3.5 minutes. And it's one of the things, I expect those last two NRA guys to be really rabid on the Second Amendment and gun rights, but a Republican, after being a shooting victim, to be this doctrinaire is pretty disappointing, I think. You can let me know what you think after we watch it together here.
If you look at some of the places where you have bad gun violence, first of all, let's recognize the vast majority of gun violence and gun killings in this country are committed by people who broke the law to get the gun. But you go to a city like Chicago, some of the toughest gun laws in the country are in the city of Chicago, and yet they have the worst gun violence.
But they'll tell you, you just go to Gary, Indiana. So, you just go across state lines. You can have all the tough gun laws you want in the world, but if you cross state lines, that's why they argue for a federal.
I do think something that doesn't get focused on enough are the amount of people across the country who over the course of a day or a week or a month, use guns to protect themselves against criminals.
Let me ask you this philosophically. Is there a limit? Do you believe that is the right to bear arms unlimited, or is there a limit?
Look, the Second Amendment really predates the Bill of Rights. Our founding fathers believed strongly in gun rights for citizens. Frankly, they thought it was an assumed right. They didn't put it in the Constitution because they didn't think it would ever be in jeopardy, but ultimately you saw attempts later on to take away gun rights, so they said it's so important, we're going to make it one of the 10 Bill of Rights constitutional changes. And so it is a long history in our country to make sure that you protect the rights of citizens to bear arms.
But is it unlimited?
It is. I mean, you've seen
really
limits.
Believe it's unlimited,
you've seen limits put in place, Chuck. You've seen limits that are already in place. And again, you've seen laws that are on the books. And those laws are there for a reason. Well, you're right in the sense that there are already limits on the gun ownership. But frankly, let's go out and enforce those laws. Don't try to put new laws in place that don't fix these problems. They only make it harder for law-abiding citizens to own a gun.
So you do agree there should be some limitations?
Well, obviously, there are limits in law.
But you said they're in
gun
law.
ownership.
Would you have supported those limits at the time?
Oh, I'm sure would have supported some of them, but probably might have opposed others. But in the end, you have laws that are on the books that aren't being enforced. Go out and focus on enforcing those laws.
Do you agree with the automatic weapons ban?
If you look at, again, some of the weapons that they included in there aren't really automatic weapons, but those laws are on the books too. And again, you haven't seen a decrease in gun violence with those laws on the books. So go and enforce the laws that are there.
All right. What do you make of this bump stock, of this accessory that takes a semi-automatic weapon and turns it into virtually an automatic weapon?
If you talk to anybody about a week ago, most people, including myself, didn't even know what a bump stock was. So
me too.
Now
me
we're
included.
finding out about it. And again, there are people that want to rush to judgment. They've got a bill written already. And I mean, look, Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi already said she wants it to be a slippery slope. She doesn't want to stop at bump stocks. They want to go out and limit the rights of gun owners. And so I do think it's a little bit early for people to say they know what to do to fix this problem. I know there are people that are asking the ATF to go back and review their 2010 decision.
You think they should?
To authorize it. And I think they should, and they are. You know, you've seen.
But you're not ready to codify it into law.
Well, again, I mean, a week ago, most people didn't know, few people, but most people didn't know what a bump stock was. So to think that we're now all experts and know how to write some, you know, panacea law, it's fallacy. You know, let's focus on the facts. Let's get the facts, and let's go focus on some of the problems. And frankly, we've done some of that already.
Is there a point?
So that makes me pessimistic. That you know, that's the House Republican Majority Whip and gun shooting victim himself, Steve Scalise, using a lot of the same talking points, some bogus, like that whole thing about Chicago having strict gun laws, as Chuck Todd pointed out there. But, you know, and he almost said that the Second Amendment right was unlimited, but then in context it sounds kind of like he's saying it is limited by laws now, but we shouldn't limit it anymore, I guess. And he was also pretty skeptical about the legislative ban on guns, even the bump stocks on semi-automatic rifles. So that's why if you take the little poll over here, I think the answer is no. Congress is not going to pass any gun control legislation. And before I get to the last news clip, I did notice I had a couple super chat contributions along the way. See if I can import these without crashing everything. Here you go. Thank you, Leandro Garcia and Grey Knight 7777, and I'm sorry I'm late to Leandro Garcia, and for Grey Knight, I do sometimes watch Fareed Zakaria GPS, especially if there are specific guests that I think I might want to take a clip from, and I may take clips from Fareed Zakaria GPS. There are some good interviews and discussions there, but generally I stick to the five main, you know, the big five corporate outlets. News analysis shows it's NBC's meeting. Well, I don't have to go through the whole list, but that keeps me pretty busy. It's already like 8 to 10 hours a day, which is why I especially appreciate those people who give me the super chat contributions or my Patreons on my patrons on Patreon. You can become a patron on Patreon at a link down in the video description. Especially the chance, even my video last week, which was totally non-controversial, and eventually did get monetized on manual review after being limited to no ads under the new YouTube system. At least that video is 25% of the views were monetized, unlike my previous videos where it was like 5%. This video, I think there's a good chance, because even though I didn't talk about, Las Vegas and the shooting there, I did talk about gun control, and so maybe it will get demonetized as too controversial or sensitive, so I don't have to worry about that as much when I get Super Chat contributions and when I get patrons on Patreon, so I appreciate that. And before I finish the show, I have one more clip. This is the one clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, with the permanent co-host or replacement or guest host, or I don't know what her title is, but Martha Raddatz. And I've often talked about how Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week has this really close relationship with the military, which means that she gets really good sources and inside information from the military, but also she sometimes seems like too close to the military. And I don't know, this next clip, it has sort of some shades of that, in that the two guests she's booked to talk about gun control and the Second Amendment are two veterans, a Democrat from Massachusetts and a Republican, I can't even remember where the Republican's from, but it's Seth Moulton and Scott Taylor. And I think this is kind of the closest we get to sort of a bipartisan take, and they seem like they could agree on banning bump stocks, maybe, except that you'll see that the Republican has sort of a nicer version of the fuzzy line argument, as I will discuss with you after we watch that final clip together here, which hopefully I fixed the audio on. That's what I was trying to do earlier. Let's see if it works over here.
The device used by the Las Vegas shooter to fire off almost 10 rounds a second, close to the rate of fire from an automatic weapon. There's a lot of talk in Congress this week that bump stocks should be regulated just like machine guns. The
It happened again. Basically, sorry, let me start that clip. Final clip, and there was that weird Sandy clip came in. Here it is.
NRA even willing to consider that. It's a rare moment where both sides on the gun debate seem like they may be able to agree. Rare because, as we all know, mass shootings almost always send the opposing camps deep into their bunkers. So what will it take to break the logjam on the big issues that divide the country on guns? Will it take a new generation? Maybe combat veterans who know all about guns and the damage they cause, to get past the politics. So we got two members of Congress, both 38 years old, who have very different views on the gun control debate, to sit together at my kitchen table. Virginia Republican Scott Taylor, a former Navy SEAL sniper who saw combat in Iraq and recovered from severe injuries sustained there. And Massachusetts Democrat Seth Moulton, a former Marine Corps captain and combat platoon leader who had 4 tours in Iraq. And I began by asking Congressman Moulton to make the case for why he thinks gun restrictions would decrease gun violence.
Well, it's shown. They're shown to affect gun violence. I mean, there are plenty of studies that show that states that have tighter gun laws have less gun violence. And this is an American epidemic. It's really a public health crisis. I've seen the effects of gun violence firsthand in Iraq, and I know that it has no place in our schools, on our streets, at our concerts. And there are things that we can do to reduce it that are within the Second Amendment. You know, Scott and I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, both as members of Congress, and the same oath as a Navy SEAL and a United States Marine. So I don't want to do anything that violates the Constitution, but there are common sense things that we can do if Democrats and Republicans come together to reduce this violence in our communities.
I hear reasonable, I hear common sense. That sounds great. Sounds great. But at the same time, what are they that actually backed by evidence do something? And I have not seen that. And I know that you support the Second Amendment. We disagree on how much we both support it or where it is. That's fine. You know, reasonable people can disagree, of course. But the Second Amendment is not just for hunting. And, you know, you hear that a lot. Oh, it's for hunting. That's not for hunting. And I get how weapons have changed over time, but the Second Amendment was put in place to be able to overthrow tyranny, and with weapons of war at the time. Now, look, I don't disagree that people shouldn't have tanks and stuff like that, but let's not misunderstand history. I mean, that's why it's there. So I think there are people who feel very, very strongly about that, very strongly. And same on your side as well, too. And look, and I applaud you for reaching across the aisle and trying to figure out ways that are reasonable, you know, that aren't what I've heard in some of the emotional, not you, but emotional other folks with your party that have come out and said things that I don't find reasonable. I find they take people's rights away.
Scott, do you think that restricting these modifications like bump stocks and other things that turn semi-automatic weapons into automatic weapons that we've outlawed before, I mean, do you think that's reasonable?
I think that I think, yes, so you could create a law that says, okay, you can't modify your semi-automatic to automatic, which is already illegal, right? But you know, as well as I do, that it's not that hard to figure out. If you want to figure it out, and you're a little bit crafty, you can do it. You know that. And so if you just create a law, you're already outside of the law if you're doing it.
Well, I do, but the reality is that these bump stocks are available for sale. I mean, we don't know if this shooter had the skills
Had you ever heard
to modify
of him before?
I had not heard of him before either.
I hadn't either.
But you know, there's a difference between being able to have to machine a part to make a weapon into an automatic weapon versus just buying something off the shelf.
Oh, and it was starting over there. Whatever. That clip was kind of messed up, and I didn't shrink it down either. But I thought it was the closest to bipartisanship. You know, I showed the Democrats, and then I showed the NRA, and then I showed Republican Steve Scalise, and based on the NRA leaders and the House Majority Whip Steve Scalise, it doesn't sound like anything's really going to pass. You can tell me whether you agree or disagree by answering this poll over here that I have by clicking on that little eye in the corner. And as to what by the way, it turns out that Scott Taylor, he's the Republican from Virginia. That was, I couldn't remember his state. He's a member of Congress from Virginia. And I thought his interpretation of the Second Amendment was kind of nonsensical, because he's saying, you know, it was meant to allow citizens to protect themselves from a tyrannical government, and, you know, so they need weapons of war to fight a civil war against the government, but then, you know, but they can't have tanks. And that's why, you know, if you look at the text of the Second Amendment again here, that it's really about the states protecting themselves from the federal government, or having state militias where they have, you know, because the founders didn't really believe that there should be standing armies. And so they thought that because the state militias would be the components of the U.S. federal forces, that would give the states like some input into the military policy of the federal government. And it's all really antiquated. And but I think there is definitely a flaw in the Republican Scott Taylor's Second Amendment argument, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. That, like I said, that was the last clip I want to show you, and I had this weird intrusion of the Sandy clip, the bonus Sandy clip that so many people have been asking me for Sandy clips every show after I mentioned it a couple weeks ago. So here's the 9-second Sandy clip that you've all already seen like 2 or 3 times, but I will end the show with that before I come back and give my final farewells. Here's the Sandy clip. That's Sandy right before I started the show. It's not alive. I saw someone in the live comments saying the Sandy clips are pre-taped, they're not live. Well, that's because I only have one camera. It's sitting on a tripod right there. Although I've been thinking of upgrading my hardware, because I have a very old laptop, and if I do update the hardware, one of the things I was thinking is maybe I could get like an inexpensive webcam and stick it over there, and it could be like the Sandy cam, and then I could switch to live Sandy clips during the show. But I don't know why people love Sandy so. I mean, we love Sandy, but why people who are watching political analysis and media criticism and the Sunday news analysis clips, why they would be such big Sandy fans. But of course, it's because everybody loves Sandy, and Sandy will be back next week, and I will be back next week for hopefully a more uplifting, or more, you know, for once. One thing I liked about this show, very little Trump. I talked about how there were these Trump stories in the background, but Trump was not in the title of the show. It was not the Trump show. It was about an actual issue. It might be demonetized by YouTube, but whatever. At least it wasn't the Trump show for 1 week. Somehow I think next week it will be the Trump show again. I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens in the next week. But I will be back next week and every Sunday for the foreseeable future, bringing you the best clips from the big 5 corporate outlets and my media criticism and political analysis. And until I'm back next week, or until I find some basis for giving you an edited, produced video, I guess I will be seeing all of you. Oh, and you notice all the new books back here? I may have to talk about that eventually, but until then, until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.